Hello again, and welcome to another episode of the Government Transformation Show, the podcast for public sector changemakers. My guest today is Afshin Attari, who is the Director of Public Sector and Unified Platforms at Exponential-E. We're going to explore operational transformation, the many nuances and aspects from policy design through to technology implementation, down to service delivery on the front line, all of which, if they're aligned properly, combine to deliver better outcomes for citizens. But not every organization gets it right. They're at different stages of maturity. Some are stronger in other areas than others. So we're going to unpack why that is and how they can start to improve across the board to deliver those outcomes that we're all looking for in the public sector. Really big topic with lots to get into. So let's jump into that conversation right now. So Afshin, welcome to the Government Transformation Show. Thanks very much for joining us today. Great to have you here.
Thank you, Tim, and it's great to be with you today.
Excellent. We're going to explore some issues around operational transformation. You were co-host of the Operational Transformation discussion table at the recent Government Transformation Summit, and I know you kind of leaned in some interesting conversations, met various civil servants in different departments who are at various stages of that journey and were sharing their insights and so on. So looking forward to getting into what you heard, what you learned, what you shared as well, and some of those wider issues that you're seeing in your work with government. But just to set the scene a little bit first, perhaps you could just introduce yourself in terms of your role with Exponential-E and how you're working with governments at the moment.
Sure, thank you. My title is Director of Public Sector and Unified Platforms within Exponential-E. I'm part of our executive leadership team, and specifically, I have responsibility for our government business. So predominantly, what we do in Exponential-E is try to serve government, and what that means is serving government through the deployment of technologies which will deliver better outcomes. So we have a dedicated team in Exponential-E, which are around our go-to-market, technical people, service people, who are very aligned in supporting government. And we engage with the health service, for example. We are a big service provider into the health service and the health and social care network arena. We serve 3/5 of London, to give you an example. So Northwest, Southwest, and Southeast London. If you go into any GP or any hospital environment, they are connected to us in accessing the health and social care network. We work with the Ministry of Justice with regards to providing telemedicine in prisons, in 133 prisons. And also, we work with Leeds Teaching Hospital in supporting the NPIC program, which is a pathology cooperative around pathology and hosting applications for pathology. And outside of health, we work with central government, the Home Office, DWP, and many other entities in central government in providing connectivity and solutions in that space. And also, we work with education. So if you pass Middlesex University is one of our key customers, and we provide platforms and technologies in that arena. And we also serve local government. So coming back to your original question, our primary objective is taking complexities of technology away in serving the public sector from a service provider perspective. But equally, we have a sense of purpose. We are citizens of the UK. We're very proud of what we do. So our government focus allows us to really contribute towards their well-being and serving of this country, which is one of the areas that we're very proud about.
Absolutely, and that core ethos comes through really strongly. And given the number of touch points and different types of public sector organization you're working with, I think it's going to be interesting to see what you're learning, hearing, and both in terms of sort of the projects you're working on and also the conversations you're having. So looking forward to sort of unpacking some of that as we go through. So as I said, you were one of the table co-hosts at the Government Transformation Summit in September, and particularly focused on operational transformation. So I guess the first question is, given there's a sort of technology aspect, obviously, to what you're doing as a company, but operational transformation, what does that mean and why does it matter to Exponential-E?
I think the reason it's important to us is, coming back to your original question, we see opportunities of supporting, delivering better outcomes to patients, to citizens, to employees through the adoption of new ways of working, of which part of that is embracing the digital opportunities that we see. As citizens, we engage with digital technologies day in, day out when we interact with banks, retail, and other areas. So I think what the question is, how can that be adopted within public sector to really, at a time where cost and funding is a big issue, how we can be more efficient in delivering those outcomes. And I talk about pathways a lot. So you could argue we have analog pathways and we have digital pathways. If we talk about digitalization, introduction of applications and platforms, what we have the opportunity to do is to look at those pathways, be it serving a patient or engaging with a local council or engaging with a central government authority, and say, okay, is there a different way for that to happen to lower cost and deliver a better outcome? And therefore, what we tend to do, again, is try to focus on taking the complexities of technology away from entities that we serve with and try to understand what they want to achieve and make recommendations on that basis and try to de-risk that delivery and deliver a good experience. And one of the areas that we tend to focus on is around satisfaction. So if you visit our website, which is Exponential-E, we promote the Net Promoter Score, because we're very proud around the experiences of our customers, and we publish that, and we put a lot of emphasis around service.
Yeah.
So that's where we see the opportunities, and that's why we're keen in supporting and working with UK government.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, I suppose one question, given the number of touch points you've got with UK public sector, I suppose, is how well do organisations typically make transformation programs work? How well do they design and execute them? If you were kind of marking the homework of UK government in terms of their transformation and operational transformation in particular, what are your key takes and observations on how well they do it at the moment? Granted, there are lots of organizations at different stages of maturity, but do you get a general sense of how well they're doing it?
We see authorities doing this very well, very impressively, and we see others which need help, to be honest. And I think where the challenge lies is where there is a clash between policy and the day-to-day needs of operational transformation. And what I would say is sometimes some of the policies which were in play have not evolved over time. Naturally, government is a very historical entity. So the question is, are the policies of today relevant to the needs of tomorrow? And that's where the clash takes place. That's the first, I think, where we see sometimes definitions. The other piece is around focusing on outcomes. I think there's an opportunity for entities in a complex world to focus on what they want to achieve, not necessarily around how it's achieved. And what I would say is, even as technologists, we have to grapple with understanding and dealing with the very complex pace of change around technology. The speed of change is very high. So we have to understand that and try to sort of establish that within a entity which isn't their core function always creates a challenge. So I think creating different pathways, thinking laterally around how those outcomes can be achieved, and I would say maybe engaging with potential partners which have credibility in a much open way to seek advice would support delivery of digital and operational transformation within the wider public sector.
Great. So there are some common themes there around some of the common challenges, some of the common issues. So I suppose the logical follow-on from that is, how can they start to improve the performance around their transformation programs, transformation projects? Where do they sort of start to make those improvements, make that inroads? What do you see around that?
I think there's one area which I think is worth exploring is knowledge sharing and knowledge transfer. What you see pockets of activity across many segments of government with a common operational challenge. So the question is, how can that learning and how can that blueprint, which has maybe been adopted in one entity, be utilized in a different entity? So how do you stop recreating the wheel? I think that's one opportunity. I touched upon outcomes. Other than talking about the how, maybe talking about what needs to be achieved. So start by defining what good looks like and what needs to be achieved, and maybe open one's mind around different ways of achieving that, because the ways of the past may not necessarily be the ways of the future. And I think the other piece is the policymakers and the policy statements and the policy frameworks, as I mentioned previously, sometimes are a hindrance. There is a policy, but there is no clear definition of why that policy is readily adaptable and required in such an environment. So maybe challenging those policies and challenging those ways of working for a new era and a new age, I think creates gives us the ability to think laterally. And I think laterally is something that we absolutely need to do at a time of change with the enablement of technology and the world that we operate in.
Yeah, and you mentioned those new ways of working, which I suppose leads us to think about some of the newer opportunities, whether that's around automation and also the kind of the newish mindset around agility and moving at pace, some of which was kind of forced upon public sector agencies, in times of crisis, COVID, etc. So, they had a taste of how things could be, and now maybe are looking to embed that new way of working in a more formal structure. So what are some of the ways that governments can start to increase their use of automation, work in more agile ways, and just become that sort of faster moving entity that I think they all aspire to be, but sometimes things like policy, things like organizational structures can hold them back?
What I would say is, at a time of COVID, there was an absolute focus on serving the nation as a whole. I say that because we had to step up, because as I mentioned, we serve the health service and we were called upon to support the health service. In one call, we were asked to provide remote access to circa 10,000 health workers to access the health and social care network at a pace, and we had to do that in 4 weeks, because you can imagine at a time of isolation at COVID, nobody could interact, so they had to access these records, but the whole environment was not set up to do that, so we were called to help. The other example I can give you is in a certain part of London, accessing the GP services because of the COVID isolation became an issue, and so we were asked to think about how we could deploy unified communications into a big entity. And we did that for 4,000 users within 4 weeks. So what I'm trying to say is that because of the criticality of the situation and the serve and the objective of delivering outcomes to serve, everyone was forced to think differently. And in doing that, one of the other examples is, and which has stayed with us, is remote or home working. Before the COVID environment and the COVID challenge, everyone would commute into an office. They would sit in an office, and they would interact that way. But we are all communicating and working in a different way, and that's allowed us to think about work-life balance. Think about the environment. How much time do we spend on commuting, and the environment is a big issue for us. And we've learned that actually we can be collaborative, we can work remotely through use of technology. But maybe if that change were asked to happen pre-COVID, I think there would have been some taboos and there would have been some resistance, which would have stopped that happening. But at the time of COVID, everyone was forced to do that. So coming back to your original question, I think COVID challenged us all, but we learned a lot from COVID as well. And I think where the opportunity is to not lose that agility, not lose that momentum, not lose that special ingredients of lateral thinking as we come back into the normal way of working, because that was a clear opportunity and a clear benefit that we should retain. And that's what I would say to government, because there is a challenge that we may revert back to where we were, of which we should not. We should learn from this experience in a positive manner.
Yeah, and you know, there are signals about the pendulum maybe swinging back the other way, and as you say, it would be a shame to lose some of the gains that came out of what was obviously a terrible time. But actually, if we can hang on to some of those positives, then that would be some sort of some sort of positive legacy from that period. And so I suppose interesting time now to maybe reflect on some of the conversations you had at the Transformation Summit. Different types of agencies, different functional focus from some of our attendees. So I'm curious to sort of see what you heard and also what you shared. So kind of what did you enjoy about those conversations in terms of speaking to government, civil servants? What was interesting to you to sort of explain to them? And then I suppose the flip side of that is, what were the interesting insights you heard back from them that challenged or confirmed or surprised anything you sort of previously felt?
What is always evident when you engage with the civil service and the public sector is the passion and the commitment. The passion and commitment and the sense to serve was absolutely overwhelming. But what I also saw is that having sort of sat at the table and met different authorities, you could see there was a common theme of common operational challenges. Of course, majority of the authority, everyone's grappling with the same thing. So the question for me was, as I said, how can that sharing, how can that knowledge management be managed effectively across governments? Because in a commercial world, there's always commercial advantage that organizations tend to protect and not want to share. But in public sector, they are not commercial entities. So if you're, for example, delivering the healthcare requirements into the general public, and you have similar challenges around delivery of healthcare into the MOD, why is it different? Because the MOD will have to consume services, and one of the discussions was around that. Is there not an opportunity to look at how healthcare is being adopted or looked at or modified and approached around delivery of healthcare services in the normal primary care environment, and how is that related to the MOD? So some of these challenges that certain authorities and entities are seeing may have actually been solved somewhere else. So the question is, how can you not reinvent the wheel? The other one is around, as I said, I mentioned this before, this contradiction of policy and reality. How policy sometimes can be a hindrance because the governance structures and the policies were not built to deal with flexible, agile ways of working. So the question is it okay to challenge policy? Because sometimes the policy setters are not close to the coalface. So I think creating that safe environment to be able to challenge the policy and say, why is it that we have to do this? Why is it we have to do that? So I think that's the other point that I felt. And I think the third point, which is absolute given, is that with the financial challenges that we see across government and we see in the market, we all collectively have a sense of duty to change around how we engage with government, consume services, And I think digital services can create that opportunity for us to do it leaner, more efficient, faster, and actually deliver a better experience for the consumers of those services, be it the employees, or be it the patients, or be it the citizens. There's a clear opportunity for us to embrace that.
Yeah, interesting. Was there anything that sort of surprised you, came out of left field that you weren't expecting, or was that actually a sort of corroboration of things you picked up elsewhere, and people shared ideas and thoughts that are sort of typical across government?
I think one point which is challenging everyone is identifying talent, retaining talent, and developing talent. And I think one of the areas that is that in the advent of digitalization and complexity around technology, acquiring, retaining talent is a challenge. And if technology and digitalization and the use of that technology is not your core function, then you have a higher risk of attracting people who would want to work in that environment. So that was a common theme, right? How do you make that happen? And I think the other point is around the softer aspects that we discussed. The new ways of working is that you can't dictate to people to, for example, one example, to commute into an office, because they may not want to come into an office because their work-life balance is a key requirement for them. So if you're adamant that you have to work in a certain way and you're dependent on a certain capability, and that capability is of short supply, the probability of you retaining and attaining that capability is very low. So I think that was a common theme, and it sort of holds and it comes into different pockets. Most organizations who are of scale and want to change will have to access the same capability. And we do have a challenge around capability and knowledge, specifically in the digital and IT services at the moment.
Yeah, one of the lasting thoughts I had from the day was during one of the panel discussions, Haruna Franklin from NHS talked about the sorting hats of Harry Potter fame. This idea that you join the civil service and you're labelled as one profession or another, and you should never stray from the lane, as it were, which seems crazy when you think about it. We have fluid, adaptable skill sets, particularly the emergent generations of talent. So why would you sort of restrict people in that way? It seems kind of counterintuitive at this point. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing those reflections, because there was a lot of conversations on the day, and so we're always interested in seeing what those big themes are that emerge. As you said, different agencies, but so often some of the similar challenges, and encouraging people to share and not reinvent the wheel, and to apply best practice and learning and knowledge horizontally across government, as well as that vertical piece, which I think is a really key point that you've made, which is from policy all the way to delivery. Is that joined up? Is that aligned? Is there a feedback loop so that everybody's understanding, does the policy play out as they expected it on the ground, and so on? So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. So we've probably run up pretty much against time. I know you're going to be joining us at the Government Data Summit as well, which is on the 20th of October. So looking forward to hosting you and your colleagues from Exponential-E there. But Afshin, all remains for me to say in the meantime is thank you very much for joining me for a really interesting conversation.
And thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
So there we have it, and thank you to Afshin again for joining me for that conversation exploring operational transformation, and also for sharing his reflections on what he heard in the conversations at the Government Transformation Summit. How are organisations doing? What are their common challenges? And what are the common areas where they can share information and knowledge to enhance all of our public sector service delivery? As Afshin mentioned, he's also going to be joining us at the Government Data Show on the 20th of October at Church House in Westminster. If you've got that DDAT focus in your role in the public sector, would like to join 150 of your peers for conversations on the day, just follow the link in the show notes, which I'll attach to this episode, to join us on the day. That's about it for now. Another episode will be along soon with another public sector changemaker. But until then, goodbye.